Chapter 9. Martin Rinkart, 1586 to 1649. Now thank we all our God, with heart and hands and voices, who wondrous things hath done, in whom his world rejoices. Translated by Catherine Winkworth, 1858. Mr. Pipes, Annie, Lady Kitty, and Drew stayed at the Alpine hut in Neander's Valley for several more days. Due to the fine weather, good hiking trails, beautiful scenery, daily visits to Neander's cave, and good fishing, when it came time to leave and return to the train, they made slow, reluctant regress, lingering often with comments like, "I say, what a simply lovely stand of forest lies here," or "I've never seen alpine flowers so pretty. I could stay here forever," or "Now this stretch of the river's gotta be just flip-flopping with fish." As they, with long faces, boarded the train, Mr. Pipes said, "Lovely though it was, think what adventures now lie before us." Several hours on the train, and if all goes well, a wonderful surprise awaits us in the tiny village of Dinklesby, where, I dare say, the town boasts a most excellent bakery. "Race you to our seats," said Drew, brightening considerably. "Something's going on here," said Drew, hours later, as they stood outside the ancient walls of Dinklesby. "I feel like I've been transported back in time," said Annie. "Yeah, the castle wall even has a real moat," added Drew. "But look at the way everyone's dressed," said Annie. Just then a man and woman strode past, pulling a wooden cart filled with yellow flowers, and two small children snuggled on a woolly sheepskin. The man wore brown knickers, a white shirt, and a vest with two-tone puffy rolls extending like little brims over the armholes. His wife wore a full-length burgundy-colored dress with billowing split sleeves. The boy looked like a miniature version of his father, and the little girl wore a dress like her mother's and a little oval cap clipped to her blonde, nearly white hair. Jostling along in the cart, the little children smiled shyly and pointed up at where Lady Kitty sat snuggled against Annie's neck. Looking wistfully at the family, Annie felt a pang of envy. "It's like everyone just jumped out of a history book," said Drew, watching the laughing crowds going in the city gate. "Indeed, this Kinderfest is an important and most happy historical celebration," said Mr. Pipes, leading Annie and Drew through the gateway of the walled village. Just inside, Drew, gazing upward, stumbled into Mr. Pipes, who had stopped to take in the scene. "Hey, will you look at that chimney?" he said, pointing at a round brick chimney jutting above a row of steep roofs. "It's got a giant nest on top, with giant birds in it." "Those are some beaks," added Annie, following Drew's gaze at the white and black birds peering down at the festivities from the jumbled sticks that made up their nest. "Storks," said Mr. Pipes. "German legend insists that storks bring children. Babies." He paused. "Not a shred of truth in it, of course." Their attention drawn again to the merrymakers, Annie and Drew looked at the crowds and felt like long ago time must have stopped. Smiling children of every age, all wearing medieval costumes, jammed the narrow cobbled streets. Bright red geraniums filled the window boxes of the tall houses, and colorful banners fluttered over the streets. Mr. Pipes, Annie, and Drew found a vantage point on the top steps of the old church. The earthy smell of horses hung in the air, and the children watched villagers spreading hay while several men saddled two enormous draft horses. An air of expectation hung over the village. Annie scanned the costumed crowds. "You know, if our spy did catch up with us," she gave a short, nervous laugh, "we'd never spot him if he dressed like all these folks." Drew looked around hopefully. Mr. Pipes' smile faded as he too scanned the happy faces all around them. Suddenly, from nearby they heard music. Annie and Drew watched with expectation as four young people played different-sized wooden pipes. The delicate sounds accompanied by the jingling of tambourines drifted through the town square. "They're going to dance," said Annie, watching a group of flower-bedecked children join hands in a large circle. Jumping and yapping excitedly, a shaggy brown dog tried following the dancers. The children laughed as they dodged around the intruder. Drew stood up and studied the musicians with interest. "It sounds sort of medieval." "Charming, isn't it?" said Mr. Pipes. "The instruments look like Fritz pipes with finger holes," said Drew. "What are they?" "Blockflöten, the Germans call them," said Mr. Pipes. "Recorders, we call them. Lovely ancient instruments, and they do, in fact, work on the same principle as organ pipes."
The dancers whirled merrily to the enchanting music. Villagers encouraged the dancers by clapping hands and stomping feet with the rhythm. Everyone applauded heartily when they finished. Then the musicians changed tunes and several adults broke into another song. Soon everyone joined in. "It's Newton," said Drew. "They're singing John Newton. How do these Germans know glorious things of thee are spoken?" Mr. Pipes laughed. "That tune, my boy, is Franz Joseph Haydn's Austrian hymn, the melody for the German national anthem. Not Newton's words, but, of course, everyone in Dinkelsbühl would know their national anthem. The great hymn tunes are, like that, timeless and universal in appeal. Alas, much of the church singing today is enslaved to a popular and, I fear, superficial expression that tends to trivialize Christian worship. Music produced by the shallow appetites of transient worldliness cannot adorn and define the noble, enduring truths of the gospel. One simply cannot make a silk purse, it is said, out of a sow's ear. The function of music, therefore, my dears, must determine the sound of music. Wise men have known that for ages." The anthem ended, and the festive dancers and villagers cleared a path in the street as a trumpet call sounded from over the fortified village wall. Drew scurried up a nearby lamp-post, and peering through the blues and pinks of a hanging flower basket, he called down to his sister and Mr. Pipes. "Check this out," he said. "I can just barely see. Yeah, there's 2 knights in full armor, with swords, big hulking ones, riding those huge draft horses up to the gates. We're talking real swords here." "Oh, what's going to happen?" squealed Annie, unable to see over the crowd pressing up the steps for a better view. "They stopped," continued Drew, his legs hugging the lamppost. "They're just waiting." "Here come some villagers," said Annie, looking back at the procession coming from the town square. A black-robed minister led a group of somber adults dressed in their finest medieval costumes out to the gate. A hush fell over the crowd as the small procession stopped before the knights. "What are they saying?" asked Annie. "I don't have a clue," said Drew. "It's all in German and too far away to hear anyway. Wait! The soldiers are shaking their heads angrily and the townsfolk are following the minister back this way. They don't look happy about something." "What's it all mean, Mr. Pipes?" asked Annie. "This entire festival celebrates the preservation of Dinkelsbühl from the ravages of the 30 Years' War. Those mounted knights represent the imperial armies, and of course the villagers represent the minister and town officials attempting to negotiate with the greedy troops eager to plunder the village." "Doesn't look to me like the negotiations went so well," said Drew, still watching from the lamppost but straining to hear Mr. Pipes. "Fact is, the soldiers rejected any terms but total surrender of the village and all her inhabitants," went on Mr. Pipes. "So why are they celebrating?" asked Annie. Just then a group of more than 100 beautifully clad children, little blonde girls with braided pigtails and flower crowns, and little boys with rosy cheeks and caps of green and brown, joined hands and made their way toward the soldiers. As they grew closer, one knight's horse snorted nervously and pranced in circles. "Watch and see," said Mr. Pipes with a smile. Then under his breath he added, "All pity choked with custom of fell or deadly deeds, but such lovely children. Who would not be moved?" The children halted before the knights, who looked sternly down at them. A little girl stepped forward, and the crowd strained to hear. Her high-pitched German rang along the narrow street. "What did she say?" asked Annie. "She has asked for mercy," said Mr. Pipes, "for the children's sake." "Don't count on it," said Drew, remembering Marchburg. "My arms are killing me," he added, dropping on the steps beside them with a thud. A great cry suddenly went up from the entire village. Drew scrambled back up the lamp-post. "The knights are galloping into the distance, and the children are dancing and shouting. Everyone's shouting." "We can hear them, Drew," said Annie. "So it worked." "Yes," said Mr. Pipes. "This commander was so impressed by the courage of the children that he left the village unharmed without even entering her gates. Great cause for Thanksgiving, 350 years ago, and today." The cheering gradually subsided. The musicians began playing another tune, and soon the entire village sang a lofty melody together. "Now, I don't understand much German," said Drew, "but the tune, it has that sound, like a hymn. It sounds like praise to God. It just sounds like it's got to be for praising God." Mr. Pipes dug in his knapsack and pulled out his hymnal. "Nun danket alle Gott," Martin Rinkart's great text. "Now thank we all our God." Set to Johann Krugar's Thanksgiving melody, an exquisite near-perfect hymn. Drew pulled out his Hymns Ancient and Modern and turned to the index. "Hey, it's in here," he said, flipping pages until he found the text. This hymn is used at most German festivals, and it appears in every single German hymnal and nearly all our English hymnals. It has definitely stood the test of time. Follow along as they sing. Now thank we all our God, with heart and hands and voices, who wondrous things hath done, in whom his world rejoices, who from our mother's arms hath blessed us on our way, with countless gifts of love, and still is ours today. O may this bounteous God through all our life be near us, with ever joyful hearts and blessed peace to cheer us, and keep us in his grace, and guide us when perplexed, and free us from all ills in this world and the next. All praise and thanks to God, the Father now be given, the Son and him who reigns with them in highest heaven, the one eternal God, whom earth and heaven adore, for thus it was, is now, and shall be evermore. The music came to a close, and Annie and Drew watched the crowd slowly drift away. Mr. Rinkart must have had lots to thank the Lord for, said Annie at last. His hymn is so full of joy, and with words like bounteous, it just sounds content and even cheerful. Please tell us more about him, Mr. Pipes. Mr. Pipes raised his eyebrows and looked thoughtfully at the departing villagers before replying. How about a visit to that bakery before I begin? Now you're talking, said Drew. Lead the way. Mr. Pipes led the children along the pavement bordering the sandstone wall of the ancient Lutheran church. The remaining merrymakers tidied the streets, and one young girl offered her flower crown to Annie. Danke, said Annie, beaming with pleasure, as she bent over and the little girl placed it on her head. Lady Kitty batted playfully at the colorful wreath. Moments later, pausing in front of a window, filled to overflowing with pastries to stop the heart, Mr. Pipes said, Ah, splendid. Here is just the place. Inside the little bakery they ordered 3 golden, flaky raspberry crisps, smothered in whipped cream, and a mug of coffee each. Behind the bakery they mounted the ancient battlements of the town wall and found a bench overlooking the rolling Bavarian countryside just outside the village. Near the bench stood a cannon poking ominously through the crenellated battlements. Drew bit hungrily into his pastry and, closing his eyes, emitted little groans of ecstasy as he chewed. Not quite, gulp, on Mrs. Beakley's, he said, pausing only briefly between bites. But not bad, chomp. No, not bad. Mr. Pipes and Annie laughed at him as they began eating theirs. When the last crumb had disappeared, Annie asked Mr. Pipes if he would finish Martin Rinkart's story. I loved the sounds of his words, she said. Bounteous and wondrous. He clearly had lots to thank the Lord for. Yes, he did, said Mr. Pipes slowly. But you and I will marvel at the trials and devastations out of which he offered such thanksgiving. Martin was born in 1586 in the walled city of Eilenburg. As a young, musically gifted teenager, he went on to be a scholar and chorister at St. Thomas School a few miles away in the city of Leipzig, where years before Luther first debated his 95 Theses. Nearly 125 years later, the great German composer and Christian Johann Sebastian Bach would become the Kapellmeister, or choir director, at St. Thomas. There he wrote most of his immortal cantatas, nearly 1 per week. He paused. Drew will learn Bach's cantatas soon. I will? Naturally, my boy. Where did Martin go from St. Thomas School? Asked Annie. He secured a music teaching position at a school in Luther's birthplace, the town Eisleben. Poetry and music were his passion, and in 1614 he received public acclaim as a poet. In 1617, the year before the outbreak of the 30 Years' War, he was called as a pastor to a pulpit in his hometown of Eilenburg. He died there in 1649, the year after the war ended. So his whole ministry was during a war? Asked Annie soberly. And a most devastating war indeed, my dear. Drew walked over to inspect the cannon. The gaping barrel projected through a notch in the wall over the moat far below. You must understand, my dears, that the 30 Years' War was root and branch, a religious war waged for the survival of Protestant Christianity in Germany. Mr. Rinkart's walled village became a place of refuge for Christians who survived the ruin of their homes in other towns destroyed by Imperial Catholic troops like Tilly's. But a great sickness spread throughout the overcrowded village, and many died. Rinkart outlived all the other ministers and found himself conducting upwards of 50 funerals a day. Mr. Pipes set his hymnal on the bench and walked over to the edge of the wall. He thrust his hands into his pockets, and Annie watched a far-away expression come over his face. His eyes looked sad as he continued. Martin's own wife grew very ill. He took a deep breath and expelled it slowly. And one day in 1637, she too died. Imagine it, said Drew. On the same day he buried his wife, he probably buried 49 other people. That wouldn't leave much time for mourning, said Annie softly. The poor man. The pestilence raged on, said Mr. Pipes, finally taking the lives of some 8,000 people. Meanwhile, outside the walls, the 30 Years' War waged on. Food grew short, and, a year later, more of the remaining townsfolk died of starvation. Mr. Rinkart spent nearly all of his own money desperately trying to feed people. To make matters worse, Swedish soldiers surrounded the walls of the town and demanded payment for protection against the imperial forces. "How could they?" said Annie, her cheeks flushed in anger. Lady Kitty jumped off her shoulder as Annie rose and looked down the stone wall into the moat. Her head began spinning, and she quickly backed away. "To fight," said Mr. Pipes simply. "Soldiers must eat." It was expected in those days that villages would give food and housing to soldiers fighting for freedoms the town hoped to enjoy when peace returned. "But they didn't have any food," protested Annie. "Yes, of course, so it fell to the minister, Mr. Rinkart, to negotiate with the troops. By his courage and good sense, he was able to bring their demands more within the feeble means of the remaining villagers." Drew leaned against the cannon, a troubled scowl on his face. "Doesn't sound so noble," he said. "What's that, my boy?" asked Mr. Pipes. "War." "Ah, the nobility does rather fade when children and wives and mothers die by the thousands. Little nobility in that." "Yes, but Dinklespool children survived," said Annie, hoping to dispel some of the gloom. "Indeed. Mr. Renkart's hymn," she went on. "He must have written it after peace returned to Germany?" "One might expect so," replied Mr. Pipes. "Fact is, Mr. Rinkart found time to write a good deal of poetry, including 66 hymns and a series of Reformation dramas celebrating the centenary of the Reformation, much of it produced while war and disease closed in on every side." Annie picked up the hymnal and looked again at Rinkart's hymn. "It says next to his name, 1636. Was the war still going on then?" Lady Kitty playfully followed a trail of ants working their way along the wall. "Yes, war raged on for another 12 years, replied Mr. Pipes. "How could he write?" asked Annie. "Who wondrous things hath done, and talk about blessed peace and countless gifts of love, when little children, his own wife, and thousands of people were suffering and dying all around him? I don't get it." Mr. Pipes ran his fingers through his white hair, then stroked his chin in thought before answering. "Peace and joy mean very little, my dear," replied Mr. Pipes, "unless they follow trouble. Mr. Rinkart had his share of trials, that is certain, but his prayer that God would guide us when perplexed and free us from all ills is a prayer for faith to see beyond the troubles and trust in God when human understanding fails us. Make sense of a war that some historians say killed off half the population of Germany? You and I can never make sense of that. We must lean not on our own understanding, but trust in God who does all things well. Only then can we with Martin Rinkart offer all praise and thanks to God in every trial, no matter how costly." Drew stared unblinkingly at Lady Kitty's play. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally Annie broke the silence. "Who was Catherine Winkworth? I've seen her name with Johann Frank and, oh, let me see. Yeah, Neander, Nikolai, and some others," added Drew. "Right," said Annie. "Did she help write some of these hymns?" "In a manner of speaking, my dear," said Mr. Pipes, sitting back down on the bench and crossing his legs. "Catherine Winkworth, born in 1829, contributed to the great literary accomplishments of many other Christians living in Victorian England. It is said that she was a person of remarkable intellectual and social gifts, especially distinguished for her combination of rare ability and great knowledge, charmed with a certain tender and sympathetic refinement. Her spiritual piety, adorned by poetic and foreign language skills, enabled her to become the most well-loved and faithful English translator of German hymns." "It's got to be tough translating poetry," said Drew. "The rhyme gets all messed up, doesn't it? I mean, German uses different sounding words than English, so it wouldn't rhyme when she's done translating it, right?" "I should say so," said Mr. Pipes. "Great hymn translators requires poetic skill of the highest rank, and of course mastery of foreign language. It takes near genius to convey all the original nuance of meaning while still keeping the poetry intact. I say, not at all an easy task." "So Catherine Winkworth really did help write Mr. Rinkart's hymn, for English speakers, anyway," said Annie. "She deserves our admiration," said Mr. Pipes. "We are deeply in her debt for giving us these wonderful hymns in English." He paused, then added, "After a fruitful life she died near Geneva in 1878. "Where's Geneva?" asked Drew. "Switzerland," replied Mr. Pipes, rubbing his hands together and smiling. "Lovely place. I shall take you there soon." "Oh, look at Lady Kitty playing on the cannon," said Drew with a laugh, pointing at the kitten crouching on the huge barrel. "Fire when ready, Sergeant Kitty," he said with a salute. "Stop!" screamed Annie as the kitten crept gingerly along the shiny bronze barrel toward the notch in the wall.
The sheer drop to the watery moat extended below her. "I say, whatever is that kitten thinking?" said Mr. Pipes, hopping up from the bench and joining Annie at the cannon, but just out of reach of the reckless kitten. "Here, kitty," coaxed Annie. "Drew, do you have anything to eat? Maybe she'll come to some food." "I don't usually have any leftovers," said Drew. "I sure hope she doesn't slip off. She could, you know. That metal gets pretty slippery and, whew, what a drop." "Stow it, Drew," said Annie. "Come here, Lady Kitty, please." "Yeah, come here, Kitty," added Drew, really wanting to help. "Don't jump." "I say, don't be foolish now," said Mr. Pipes in reasoning tones. Annie never talked about what happened next without shuddering and growing pale. A little white butterfly flittered lazily toward Lady Kitty, where she crouched just over the mouth of the cannon. Annie gasped. Lady Kitty lifted her head and followed the dizzying flight of the butterfly. Then, haltingly, ever so haltingly, she lifted a white-tipped paw off the cannon and reached toward the butterfly. Suddenly she slipped. Her little claws scrambled frantically on the round, unyielding bronze. Annie screamed. Lady Kitty, ears laid flat and tail bristling, clutched frantically at the air with her claws as she plunged down. Annie groaned as her kitten landed in the moat with a pathetic little splash.